Welcome back. A reminder of the top story here on the News Hour. There's still no agreement at the climate change conference in Copenhagen. But in the past hour, US President Barack Obama has invited Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao for another bilateral meeting to discuss a draft agreement.
Whatever outcome this conference may produce, we are fully committed to achieving and even exceeding our target.
We are ready to get this done today. But there has to be movement on all sides to recognize that it is better for us to act than to talk.
Now that we started to grow, it's not fair for the developing countries. Now we would go back and make more sacrifices.
Well, President Obama is facing a tough crowd in Copenhagen as he tries to persuade leaders it's time for an agreement. Back home, he's got an even tougher audience to convince. For more on that, let's cross back to Gita Farquhar in Washington. Gita.
That's right, Darren. Even if Obama signs an agreement, he will have to get Congress to sign off on it. But powerful lobbyists in the energy sector are already saying the economy will suffer under any new regulations. And their voices will surely carry a lot of weight as Congress considers any deal. Sebastian Walker traveled to Houston, Texas, where he met workers from the state's large oil and gas sector. They say Obama has little chance of convincing Americans.
Driving east from Houston, Texas, oil, gas and chemical refineries stretch as far as the eye can see. The fumes that many say are a major cause of global warming frame the landscape here, belched out by countless chimneys 24 hours a day, all year round. It's a sight local environment campaigners say shows America still isn't taking climate change seriously enough.
This is the belly of the beast. If you use something that comes from petroleum, if it's in your car or in a piece of plastic, it's coming through Houston more than likely. Houston has some part in it. And all of the things that come out of that, all of the dangerous pollutants, all of the particulate matter, all of the air toxics, the greenhouse gases, they're all right here.
And it's not just refineries. Huge coal-fired power stations also loom over the Texas countryside. While there have been some cuts on greenhouse gas emissions in the past few years, operations like this still burn so much carbon dioxide that Texas ranks alongside entire industrialized nations in its contribution to global warming.
This plant alone is pumping out millions of metric tons of carbon dioxide every year. But it's just one of many across this state, making Texas by far America's worst carbon dioxide polluter and even propelling it into the global top 10.
The White House says a step was taken towards greater regulation when its Environment Agency declared greenhouse gases hazardous to public health earlier this month. But energy industry insiders say that's not a stand that will go very far in Texas.
To adopt policy based on a science which to many has not been proven, is something that we should all look at with a great deal of attention.
Even for those battling to rein the industry in, like environmental lawyer Charles Irvin, decisions made in Washington aren't necessarily where the buck stops.
Delay has been one of Texas's excellent qualities when it comes to pushing back against federal regulations. So I expect them to follow a similar strategy on CO2. I think there'll be litigation. I think the state will try and oppose the imposition of any kind of EPA regulations for as long as they can.
The US president may be hoping to forge a global front against greenhouse gas emissions, but there's a lot of work to be done closer to home. Sebastian Walker, Al Jazeera in Houston, Texas.
Earlier I spoke with Randa Fahmy, who was an official in the Department of Energy under President Obama's predecessor, former President George Bush. I began by asking her if Obama was going to provide real leadership in Copenhagen.
He sent members of his administration, including the Secretary of State, the climate czar, prior to his arrival. And there's, 20-plus members of Congress, both, bipartisan delegation led by Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, who flew over to Copenhagen. So I don't think there's any question about American leadership on this issue.
Beyond leadership, will the U.S. put up the kind of money that is necessary to make a difference on this issue?
Well, that's the problem. From a policy perspective, I think that there certainly is scientific backing to the issue of climate change. No one wants to argue that anymore. I think after former Vice President Gore did it so eloquently. The problem is the United States cannot throw money at this. We are in a declining economy here in this country, and if the Obama administration's approach is to participate in a U.S.-led fund for $100 billion, you cannot throw money at the problem of climate change.
But is this throwing money at the problem? Because the U.S. obviously had the money to bail out all these banks and financial institutions to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. Now you're saying there's not enough money to save the planet?
Let's look at the cumulative effect here. First of all, in many of these bailout monies, it is being paid back as we speak. Many of these banks are paying back those funds. The cumulative effect is the health care problem, which the U.S. government and the Obama administration is going to have to put money into. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, otherwise known as the stimulus package, coupled with the wars in Afghanistan, which continues on, and Iraq. The American taxpayer's credit card is maxed out, and the Obama administration can't keep throwing money at something like climate change. It's not going to be supported.
Internationally, obviously, climate change has a huge effect on very many developing countries, and very many people around the world see the United States as being the prime country responsible for the emissions of greenhouse gases to begin with. Well, so doesn't the U.S. have a special role to play?
Coupled with China, and I think probably the number one abuser.
Historically, China has recently overtaken the U.S.
Absolutely, and China has said, no, we're not playing in this. We are not going to sign on to any long-term climate change agreement. We will do something short-term. The presidents met today. But China has said if China's not going to do it,
but let's talk about the U.S. If the U.S. doesn't do much, where does the goodwill of the Obama administration go?
I'm not saying the U.S. isn't going to do much. The U.S. is to step out and say we're going to participate in this $100 billion fund. The U.S. is doing a lot. I'm looking at the perspective of the American people, and then they're not going to support something like this.
But even looking at it from that perspective, from the national and very narrow national interest of the United States, science has shown that there is a correlation between climate change and the increase in natural disasters like hurricanes. And looking at the current state of the levees across the U.S., the kind of infrastructure, it could cost the United States moving forward billions of dollars in damage, not to talk about the cost in lives, if this type of natural disaster is allowed to continue.
Right.
So isn't there serious consequences for the U.S. as well?
But the problem is this, again, there's one thing to admit the science in it all. There's another thing to say, economically, we are going to put the money in that's required and necessary to do that. And I don't think we can afford to at this moment. This is not the right time. If we were in better economic times, perhaps it would be much more acceptable. But because of the state of the economy here in the United States, jobless rate is skyrocketing. You know, cap and trade, by virtue of the legislation that was passed in the House, necessarily is going to mean decrease in jobs. People will lose their jobs. Even President Obama during his campaign said if cap and trade passes, people's utilities will go up. There's no question. And utilities don't discriminate against the very poor, economically affected individuals to the very wealthy. So this is not a matter of science. This is a matter of economics. And cap and trade just isn't going to fly in this economy.